How do you write ads, concept ads for your brand that actually sell products? You do that by speaking to what benefit your product actually provides to the deep desires of your customers. And if you have a good product and can do that effectively, then you should be able to draw that out and tell people how to do that. And Sarah Levinger can help you. Sarah is a consultant who does consumer behavior strategy for brands. I have followed Sarah for so long, it is sort of silly that this is actually the first time we've ever talked. And you're going to love this conversation because we're going to go to exactly how, and I mean, I try to get exactly as possible here. We're going to be very tactical and practical to actually write ads that do this. I want you to walk away from this episode and probably pause this episode multiple times and write down, here is the hook, here is the angle, here is the information, here is the outro. Sarah is going to help you do that by thinking more about consumer psychology, what people really want, and how to speak to those things. So let's not delay it. Let's talk to Sarah Levinger.
Oh my gosh, Nate's gonna be so happy that you just plugged his podcast.
Yeah.
Shout out to Nate.
Shout out to Nate Legos. Well, so I mean, this is a good starting point, Sarah. Nate, I had followed you for a while, and then Nate, who I think is uniquely awesome. Nate's been on my podcast twice. I will link both of those in the show notes of this episode. I'm writing that note down right now so I don't forget. And when I was talking to Nate, he was like, one of the things that really helped us at Original Grain was talking to Sarah Levinger and thinking more about really what our customers want. He sells watches, really cool watches with all these collabs and all that kind of stuff. And he said, talking to Sarah helped us realize we weren't selling watches. And that's something, that's what he said. And so maybe that's a good starting point, just because it's a reference point that's shared from a few different places. What is Original Grain selling, and how does that nicely intro who you are and what you think about and what you do?
Such a good segue. I actually really loved working with Nate because, again, shout out to Nate. Everybody should just shout out Nate because he's just really good at what he does.
Yeah, his podcast is great, by the way. Like I've plugged it a couple times, and it's only like 10 to 15 minute episodes. Like you can like shotgun it really fast.
And they really are like tactical and practical. I'm like shocked that he's able to keep it to that, because sometimes you just get in the weeds on podcasts. But anyways, I digress. So when I met Nate, we had basically just been chatting like on Twitter and things. We've been commenting on each other's posts for a while, and he had hired me basically to come in and take a look at all of specifically their messaging on their advertising. Now, usually when I get hired in these capacities, most of the time I'm working with a couple different people, either the founder, the media buyers, some sort of operator of the business, the CMO, those type of things. And they almost always assume for some reason that I'm going to come in and tell them, oh, you just need to increase the amount of social proof, or you just need to add more urgency or more scarcity, because the entirety of my business is built on a psychology foundation. And I have to gently remind people that I don't do like marketing hacks per se. Yes, scarcity proof and authority proof is psychology, but that's not what I do.
Dude, so I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is like so much of the kick I'm on right now is that when people think about advertising and things like this, right? Like they're just like all of these case study type pieces of content on the internet about that kind of stuff. Got to add so, and so I hear that all the time, and I just want to bang my head against the wall, because it's like, first of all, like the vast majority of those case studies and those pieces of content were not created with any like scientific rigor. Like nobody is like meaningfully testing this with replicable processes or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
And secondly, what I continue to believe is that it's actually about messaging. It's not like those things 100%. May be useful tools here and there and help you squeeze out a couple more, like percentage points, not like I should say small percentage increases in value or something like that, but they are not going to meaningfully impact your business. They're not. Exactly. What is going to do that is your ability to speak to these things. So anyway, so you said you start talking to Nate, and you start talking about messaging, and people did he think that's what you were going to say, or was he aware?
I think Nate came in with the idea that Sarah's going to help us with our copy, right? Which is a piece of what I do.
Sure.
But the majority of what I focus on is understanding the behavior that actually drives like purchases, right? And again, this is all kind of comes down to how well you understand what humans are actually susceptible to and influenced by. So when I started working with Nate, they really had a good messaging foundation. The brand was actually scaling very well. They had a very healthy setup. They had a pretty healthy ad account just because Nate's good at what he does. But when I came in, we had to identify pretty quickly which way do you want to take the brand emotionally? And this goes back to like your first question, which is like, what are they actually selling? Now, the physical entity of what a brand sells is a product almost always, unless it's a service or B2B, obviously, or SaaS. But in D2C, we sell products. That's what we do. People purchase something from us. We ship it to their house. They actually physically get to interact with our brand, but that's not actually what they're buying. Most of the time, I have to do deep dives into all kinds of different psychological, models to help people understand. People purchase from emotion, right? They're not purchasing from the logical side of their brain. They purchase with emotion and then justify that purchase with the logical side of the brain. And that's just how neuroscience works. So
yeah,
that's what I worked with.
Okay, so let's just take that to another level. I mean, there's a lot you could say there, and I think that's really right. And by the way, I'll like flag here that sometimes when I hear conversations like this, I think about like it almost sounds manipulative, right? It's like you're like tapping into psychology or whatever. Well, but there's a simple way to like solve this sort of from an ethics perspective, which is to sell stuff that is actually good. Like if you do that,
Yes,
then
exactly.
you are actually doing. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the way that I have sort of thought about this for my agency. Is like I just don't take clients whose products I don't actually want to sell people.
Yes.
And I don't
100%.
and I don't take clients who, if we succeed and they get very rich, I think will probably make the world meaningfully worse with their money. So, that's like those are like my two ways of staying away from this. And then within that framework, I'm like, okay, now how do I sell as much stuff as possible? So, if anybody else is like me, and
to your point, oh my gosh, psychology is happening whether you know it or not.
Right, exactly.
Sorry to interrupt, but this is like my shtick. Is like you're using psychology whether you know it or not.
Right.
My job is to help you learn how to use the psychology effectively and ethically and on purpose, so that way you know which direction to go next. Because half the time you're doing it on accident, which is worse, I think, than doing it on purpose.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I don't know if you're under NDA or anything like here. So if you can't say anything more about what Original Grain is selling, that's okay. We can come up with a different example. But let's actually take that to another level, right? So you said, you're not selling the product, you're selling something else. Let's just use that example because it's a good example and an easy one just because we're on it, right?
Yeah.
Original Grain selling watches, and as Nate has talked about, watches made out of whiskey barrels, watches made out of old guitars, all kinds of stuff like that, right? What is Original Grain selling sort of beyond the watch in that case, and again, if you could speak sort of specifically to their thing, then that would be great. And maybe we can ask Nate if it's okay if we say this or not, but a tangible example.
Giving this information away.
Yeah.
So, to kind of understand how to sell an emotion, you have to kind of go down into what consumers and humans are actually building emotion from, right? So how the brain actually processes emotion through. So when you get information in the brain, it's going through the subconscious mind, which processes about 95% of what your decisions are on a daily basis. So that sounds like a lot. And if it shocks you, it should. Like I'm terrified on the daily that most of my decisions are not being made logically. They're all irrational. It's coming from like years of experiences and like different things that I've interacted with over the course of my lifetime. And then I'm just taking it and making a very reactive decision for most things that I interact with during the day. And this is for everybody on the planet, right? Now, since the information is going through that particular brain, the subconscious mind is a very emotional one. It's a very old brain. Some people call it lizard brain. It's the brain that we don't really have a whole lot of access to, but you can gain access to that side of your brain through the logical side. So your conscious mind is very, very important. It's a slow processor. It only processes about 40 to 50 bits of information per second compared to the subconscious, which processes about 11 million bits per second. Yep. So it's a very slow guy, but it's very calculated, right? It's making very conscious decisions. So since that's how consumers are actually making decisions, if we can speak to some sort of emotional piece of themselves that is buried deep within the subconscious mind, it's going to be so much faster, more efficient, cost-effective, and just much more powerful way to market brands. So in the case of Original Grain, they actually had two different markets, individualized market where somebody was coming in and purchasing these watches for themselves. And then they also had a gifter market.
Yep.
Now, these are two totally different
I love this
states
example
of purchasing, right? Yeah. And a lot of brands have this.
This is a great lead into this concept. I actually think this is a really helpful way to illustrate some of these things you're saying, because gift purchasers, like at first glance, it looks like what they're buying is something for somebody else, but they're actually not.
Yes.
They're buying for themselves, because there is something in it for the gift purchaser. Yeah, well, yeah, I don't even think it's a hot take.
100%.
It just occurred to me because I had a gift brand for a
Yeah.
while, and it was like 80% gifts, and so I just it occurred to me like, oh, like, and I've people who have listened to me for a little while have probably heard me say this, but I'm a terrible gift giver, and so like it is I am, and so it's deeply fulfilling to me when I come up with a gift that I feel like
A good gift.
is a good
Yeah.
like, and I
Yep.
get a
Yep.
lot out of that experience, and so it's a perfect way of
Yes.
illustrating. I'm actually buying this thing, but I'm really not. I'm
Mhm.
buying the experience of giving a gift that is
Yeah.
fulfilling to me to do something because it feels
Exactly.
good to give a great gift. So it's like a perfect
Well,
illustration.
yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, so keep going.
The weirdest part about this too is if you can understand like how human behavior actually works and you start to identify the core pieces of what goes into it, you realize that emotion is blended. There's never one emotion that we're feeling all of it
That's a great point.
at one time. Unless it's like, basic emotions like rage. Like if you're feeling real ragey, usually other emotions
Yeah.
can't kind of like
Yeah.
come into that one. But for the most part, emotions are blended. So in the case of gifters, this idea of what we call nurturance, right? Where you're trying to love and appreciate and show some sort of affection for the people in your lives. That's a huge piece of it. And that's usually the only messaging marketers go after, which is like get them a gift that they will love.
Right.
To your point, that's only half of it.
Right.
The other half is esteem focused. So the esteem emotion comes down to like, I want to feel like I have good appeal with the people that I want to be respected with, right? So when you're going after a market that is esteem focused, they really want to find products and purchase things that help them feel like they're somehow elevated above other consumers or other people in their life. So for gifters, this is a blended emotion. You have esteem focus and you have nurturance focus, and you got to come up with messaging that hits both, not just one or the other. And this is the reason why I tell people I don't do copywriting, I don't do psychology hacks.
Yeah.
I'm teaching like blended emotional
Yeah.
empathy, basically. So empathy training is
Yeah.
probably what I'm best known for. But in the case of Original Grain, this is the reason why it worked, because we were able to figure out a message that blended both emotions into one.
You probably know you should be considering offshoring more labor in your business. And the problem with your thinking about that right now, if you are thinking about that, is you're also probably thinking about that as something that is entirely about being cheap, getting low end, low quality talent for repetitive tasks, etc. And that is the wrong way to think about offshoring talent in your business. The right way to think about it is to go find incredible A players with deep e-commerce resumes who you can pay a premium relative to local market wages in the countries where they are. That is more than other people get paid in their same country and less than you would pay here. And the place to do that is with my friends at More Staffing in the Philippines, where there are folks with incredible deep e-commerce resumes who are building e-commerce businesses, know what they're doing across every part of the organization: supply chain, operations, all the way down to customer service, marketing, people with really good resumes who can come and help your business for a much lower cost than it would cost to hire those same people in the US. How do I know More Staffing is the place to do this? Because I have worked with them myself and they're staffing my business. I have more employees in the Philippines than I do in the US, and they have all been staffed through my friends at More Staffing. I have never fired one of them. They're awesome. I just had another one recently. So go to morestaffing.co/AF, morestaffing.co/AF. They will do an incredible job for you. They'll even give you a 1-year guarantee. So in the event that you make a hire that doesn't work out, which of course does happen occasionally, though rarely in my experience with people working with More Staffing, in the event that does happen, they will replace that. They will find you a new person to fill that role for free. They will not charge you an additional cost to do it. So go to morestaffing.co/AF to get started with More Staffing now. So you then help craft that message. So you say like, this is what's in it for the customer, for your customer. You take the gift customer in this case, right?
100%.
Right. And so then Nate from there is going and crafting the messaging and sort of running it by you and saying, is this like, how does that do a little plug for your service here? What actually makes that practical for somebody to turn that insight into actual marketing?
In this particular case, I actually wrote this headline because it was a part of my service, and this is something I still provide. So I guess we have to back up. It's very important, once you understand how the brain processes information and emotion, to now try and figure out which emotion are we going after. And this is something I think all brands miss. Everybody wants to go straight to the marketing hacks and CRO and changing button colors and using emojis and getting UGC and yada, yada, yada.
Just wasting your time.
Before you do that, just slow down a little bit. Just slow down.
Yeah.
I do not believe in a volume game. I get a lot of flack for this, but I love this hot take. I don't believe in volume-based marketing or advertising. I do not think you need hundreds of ads in your ad account and testing all of these different angles and ideas every single month just to try and get 2 winners that prop up the entire account. You should have somewhere between 7 to 10 winners all scaling at the same exact time, all based on the emotions that you know are going to hit. Super crazy important. So I only test 9 ads a month.
Okay.
And that's it. So I can walk you through the process of how we did this for Original Grade.
Well, let me pause there because people, I think, are going to hear that as somewhat different than my strategy. And I'll tell you what I actually think about that. What I think is that it might be right. I'm not totally convinced of that. This is obviously just my opinion, right?
That's fine.
I think it's possible to generate massive amounts of advertising and to build a media buying approach that allows you to basically take the thing you're doing and also at the same time, like to essentially do that alongside a quantity approach where you are trying to take some of the insights that you're bringing and then also just generate mass amounts of them simply for the reason that you might be wrong. And that basic belief about myself that I might be wrong about some of, and not that you're wrong about that strategy, but that I might be wrong about what the consumer actually cares about. I might be wrong about how this product, I might just not have thought of something. Yeah. And if you can create enough assets cheap enough, and the cost of testing those assets is also extremely cheap, then you have a very high cost to impact ratio, right? Or I should say low cost to impact or impact to cost ratio, right? So I think in that world you can do it. And it's funny, I've got a podcast that'll probably come out before this one goes live with Taylor Holiday, who is probably on the extreme other end of what you just said. And Taylor made the case. And I was actually reflecting on our conversation afterwards and thinking to myself, I don't know, I maybe should have pushed back more, but I'm just unsettled in my own thinking about this. I'm watching one client of mine right now who is extremely good at leveraging AI and in terms of creating mass volume. I'm not totally sure it's going to work yet, even though he can spin out assets faster than anybody I've ever seen, like long form landers, insanely fast. And so, so it's sort of interesting. I mean, this is a little bit of a detour, but I think it is a helpful thought. Like in the midst of that, one of the things I'm doing purposefully with that client is not using those tools very much, and instead trying to think like almost line by line on some of these ads because of this like messaging is everything kick that I'm on. Like the volume isn't there. So I don't know. I don't know what I think about that quite yet, but I'll say what I do think for sure is that at least part of what you're saying is right, which is that I do believe that thinking really deeply about these kinds of things will produce better assets. And I do think you will generate like a higher, let's just call it hit rate on your ads by doing that. I think it's just maybe that you can do also both. That there's also some ways to generate a high quantity alongside the high quality, and there's a place in your marketing mix for both of those things, and that you shouldn't commit to one. In point of fact, and this maybe comes, we'll segue us back to your point in that same Twitter thread, and I'll link it here that you and Nate and I were all in. Taylor chimed in and said he thinks messaging is really important too, but that messaging is downstream from marketing planning, which is downstream from product, which is downstream from your brand. And the actual problem people make is that they haven't thought hard about brand. They haven't thought hard about like how their brand and not just colors and design preferences, right? But like, what is your brand saying and doing and contributing to the world? And then 100%. From there, letting all of that go down, creating into your actual messaging, which I actually think maybe some overlap in what you two are saying there, right? Which is like, step back. What is this brand actually contributing to the world? And then go and execute the specifics of your ads.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I think Taylor and I love getting in discussions with Taylor because like we disagree heavily on a lot of stuff. And then there's some things that I'm like 100%.
Yeah. It's the most fun.
It's like, it's a good brain training for me because I'm like, this is interesting. I never thought of it the way you're thinking of it.
It's America's fifth major sport.
When I say, especially on Twitter. So when I say I don't go for volume, I always have to caveat that because usually that's the response I get, which is like, what do you mean you don't go for volume? Absolutely, you should be producing ads at scale in a volume format after you have solidified what you're actually selling, the emotion of what you're selling. So for instance, True Classic is the only brand I've ever seen that has been able to go for a volume strategy, but it's because they understand the emotion of what they're selling so incredibly deeply that they can go after a large volume of ads because most of them will produce something valuable for the brand. Same with Liquid Death. Liquid Death is prolific.
Extreme.
They're running so many ads, but they have never once deviated from the emotion that they're currently selling. So again, my strategy is basically to get people to the emotion that they should be selling first, and then give it to the creative teams and teach them how to do it at scale. So it's not that I don't like volume.
Yeah.
It's that I don't like volume as a testing methodology.
And okay, yeah, well, so again, I might disagree a little bit on that point entirely because I think it's so cheap to test at volume with manual bidding. But but that's actually a little beside the point. It doesn't so much matter for this conversation in the sense that I think your basic point is right. And actually, the place that I'm trying to go with this client right now that is extremely good at AI, and I may bring him on because I think there's real value in what he's doing and have him talk about it a little bit because it's pretty cool, and certainly there are some parts of the marketing mix for the brand that are working great with AI. So there's no question there. But what was I going to say? Oh, at the same time, we're trying to do exactly what you just said. Right now, we're going like, okay, we're sort of plateaued on our spend to take us to the next level. We're all stopping and analyzing a lot and going like, let's make some hypotheses. What is actually driving the customer to make this purchase? And let's think about that a little bit more. And now let's go develop assets that do this. And the hope is to go a step past that as well, which is, okay, how does this not only form our sort of core identity, but then also how do we supply creators, influencers, any of those kinds of people with the brief and the prompt while letting them be creative in some ways? This is where we want you to make the inroad to our customer and 100%. Then go do that at scale.
Yeah. Well, and that takes time. Like you need to take time for your brand to step back and pull yourself like out of the day-to-day operations to be able to identify that. So again, the entirety of like the strategy that I use is built upon a good amount of data because again, I can't tell what's happening unless I've studied what the consumers are actually doing behaviorally, and that comes out in your data. Now, in my book, data is a indicator, not a validator. It doesn't tell you why people are doing things. It just shows you that something is happening.
Yes.
And it drives me crazy when people are like, well, we have X amount of CPA and our click-through rate's this and our hook rate is this, so this is why it's working. And I'm like,
that's a hypothesis. It might be. It might be why it's working, but then you have to go test it. And this is right. This is the right way to test this kind of thing, right? And make that hypothesis about the messaging. Don't make it about frame changes and stuff like that, right? Think about like, what is the messaging? We just went through this with a client. I actually may see if I can share it at some point because I think it's exactly right. And now we're trying 2 or 3 different hypotheses at some scale for exactly the same reason. I think you're so right about that, and people really miss this.
Hypothesis
I also totally agree that people are just distracted. There's too much to do, and so they don't step back and do the analysis.
Yep. And half of that takes just self-control and a little bit of like scheduling.
Totally.
You got to schedule it in.
Yeah.
Every single week, you should be sitting down, pulling all the way back and just being like, what is going on behaviorally? For instance, I had a good brand that I was working with, actually an agency brand, that they had this really weird anomaly where they were noticing the colors that were currently selling best with this particular brand and this product didn't match up with the demographics. The demographic information showed high female audience, much older, kind of boomer age, and then all these different very masculine colors for this particular product. And it was fascinating because when I went in there, my initial hypothesis was, oh, this product is being sold to a female audience, and you should go this way with this particular messaging. After we started noticing the colors, though, of what was selling the best, it was immediately apparent this female audience is purchasing for her husband.
Yeah,
and we never would have known that
right.
had we not looked at the actual data of like, this color is selling, but it's selling to a female audience, but it's a masculine color. Like it just, you got to take everything into view. You can't just go one data piece at a time.
To your point, you test if that's actually true, right? You go create the messaging because that's your hypothesis.
So now we're going to go,
and now you go generate the next batch of ads to go test. Is this right? And go do that. So yeah,
it's all about that messaging. And now we can say like, buy this for him. And the messaging shifts, and we'll see how that performs. If it performs much better than everything else, we know we're on the right track.
Right, and then you go scale it up. Yep. You are still doing your ad tracking with the native pixel integration between Shopify and Meta ads. You are doing it wrong, and you should switch to BILY right now. BILY.ai is an affordable 100% server-side tracking, actually a one-stop shop replacement for Google Tag Manager. You can use it for Meta ads, Google ads, GA4. Like at the click of a button, they will all be set up. TikTok ads, Snapchat ads, all in one place, all really fast and all with upgraded tracking on Meta ads. You will see extremely high event match quality scores. I know it because I use it with my clients. And so I watch the EMQs go up in Meta Ads Manager relative to other tools that I've used, as well as relative, especially relative to the native Shopify integration. Also, like if you do Google Ads, it'll be immediately built with enhanced conversions turned on. BILY is a great tool. I use it with my clients. BILY.ai for 100% server-side tracking. Get better data from your store. Send that data to Meta Ads, which means better, fuller reporting and better performance as well. So go do that right now. BILY.ai. BILY.ai. You can get started test it for yourself in your account for $1 for the first month. So there's really no risk to you. Go check it out. That's so good. That's interesting. A while back I did an episode about like the 3 phases of Meta Ads growth, and it's occurring to me now that I should have thought of something differently, which is that I framed it as you find your creative message that works. That's step 1. That's phase 1. Step 2 is build process to go generate that at scale, and then phase 3 is you go multi-channel from there, right? So you Meta is the most profitable channel.
Yeah.
If you want to add other channels, you got to start by doing 1 and 2 first, right?
Yeah.
I think the miss in that framework is that you actually may have multiple versions of step 1, right? So in your account, right, to the gift and non-gift purchaser, you may go like, okay, here's customer A is like this, customer B is like this. And so customer A, you find the messaging that works, and then you scale it up, and then you go multi-channel with that message. But then you go repeat the same thing with a new set of customers and a different value proposition and all those kinds of things, And I think that's probably a better way to frame that to the point that you're making.
Yeah. You only need as many like ICPs and targeted like what would you call it? Target markets, right? So you only need as many avatars as people have reasons for buying. Some brands may have 12 avatars. Right. Some brands may have 2.
Yep.
It all depends on the behavior that people are currently like involving themselves in and who's influencing that behavior.
Yep.
So yeah.
Okay, let's do more.
Good takeaway.
Let's do more psychology. So let's see. Talk about I'll let you decide. Do you want to talk about more broadly, or do you want to stick with the original grain example and talk more about somebody buying for themselves? Let's talk about maybe a dude buying for himself. This is where I would go. Tell me if this is not where you want to go. If a dude's buying a watch for himself, let's say a whiskey barrel watch from original grain, let's make that the same distinction, right? He's buying the watch, but then there's like this psychology element of what he's actually buying, or however you want to frame that, right? I don't want to put your words in your mouth. So we talked about the gift purchaser a little bit. What about the person buying for themselves, and how do we apply this framework to that situation?
Individual purchases are really interesting because depending on the product, their behavior also will change because there'll be blended emotions that kind of come into play here. And to your point, when it comes down to messaging, I have to try and make the distinction between, are you purchasing this as a status symbol when it comes to watches, at least in this example? Is it a status thing for this person? Or is it more of like a self-love thing for this person? So for instance, I had 2 different brands that I've done this before. The very first brand I ever ran any of my NLP reports on, like the actual psychographic research report that I provide, that brand was a high-end luxury leather bag from Italy that was being imported that sold for like $300 to $600 a pop. Like it was an expensive product. And so I went through, ran the NLP, and
for men
found
or for
out
women,
pretty quickly that it was for men.
Okay,
which I actually really love like male-focused products because there's a lot of really interesting things that come out with dudes that are very different than women, right? Like self-love for men looks very, very different than it does for women behaviorally. So for this particular product, we found very quickly that the message of treat yourself to Italian leather worked incredibly well for this audience because the majority of the behavior that we were seeing was people were purchasing for milestones that they were hitting in their life. Graduations, graduated from law school, got a new job, moved to a new city, right? So treat yourself is a nurturance focused message. It's actually self-love.
Yeah.
But it's very still steeped in this idea of esteem as well, right? So they're both of them still ran in the same targeted audience of esteem and nurturance. So treat yourself to Italian leather. Very different though than what we ran for original grain.
Yeah.
So original grain continued kind of the messaging that they had from before because Nate had something that was working extremely well, which was this idea of like, if you're a whiskey lover, you will purchase a whiskey made like watch.
Right.
Different kind of messaging, same core emotion.
Right.
Fantastic. Like really interesting stuff.
Yeah. That's so good. Okay. So do you, So tell me about the psychographic report. You breezed past that, but what do you actually provide people? And
Yeah.
this is a totally non-sponsored episode. I'm actually just curious to see like what kind of insights are you? I mean, go
Yeah.
do this right with Sarah, but like, what kind of insights are you pulling from that, and then how is that informing
Yeah.
actual marketing messaging?
Yeah. So the research reports that I currently run is basically built off of a psychology model built by a man named Will Leach. I praise this guy constantly. He's a really good friend of mine, good mentor. He wrote the book Marketing to Mind States. So anybody who's read that book, because I'm obsessed with it, this is his model. So Will is a 25-year veteran in he's an economist and he's a behavioral scientist. So he was obviously working with the big brands like Pepsi, Frito-Lay, like big ones, and found that there were 9 different emotions that usually came out during the pre-purchase process. And this is just based on all the data that he was running through. So his specific model was built to run through customer interviews. And when I read his book, I was like, I bet you I can do this with ads. Like, I'm pretty sure I can take what he's doing and use it in ads. So my current NLP reports, I take down as many reviews off of the website as possible. I'll run it through an AI system that will categorize it into these 9 different emotional categories for me. And then from there, I can identify based on frequency number, the top 3 emotions that are occurring before people purchase. So these are usually the emotions they're looking to solve by purchasing this product. Now, depending on where we download or like, where we gather these reviews from, the sentiment changes a little bit. Reviews from Amazon are usually very intense. People are not calm on Amazon. But if you take it from the brands, usually they're very like neutral a little bit to the positive sentiment because they're trying to like say something nice about the brands they love. After we find out the 3 core emotions, though, from there, I basically do a whole bunch of nuanced headline generation, messaging generation,
Right.
using ChatGPT and thesaurus.com.
Yeah, sure.
Because I don't like to think. Like, I don't want to have to think about messaging. It's too difficult. So I have an entire process that I use that will help me generate headlines specific to the emotions that I know our customers are purchasing with.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, okay, so can we talk about what some of those emotions end up being? Like, what maybe what are some of the common ones? What are people thinking about regularly that are coming up for a lot of sort of D2C product brands? You may want to take this to men, to women, wherever you want to go. Like, are there typical things that you're seeing like for brands to be aware of?
Yeah. So the weirdest part about consumers is their behavior changes cyclically, like in a cycle about every 12 weeks, right? So as the seasons come up, we start to change our consumer behavior. Sometimes twice, usually in Q4, it changes 2 times because of Black Friday. So consumers just change naturally their behavior, how they're doing things. If you start to notice a slowdown in purchases around end of September, early October, that's on purpose. It happens every year. It's not weird. Consumers are changing their behavior because they're waiting for Black Friday.
Totally.
That's on purpose for them. So consumers are changing their behavior about every 12 weeks. So I've worked with a few brands now, like 3 or 4 years, that we've just tracked it using the data to see which messaging hits in spring, which messaging hits best in the summer, which messaging hits best in the fall. And now we just know every year we need to start, like for beauty brands, we need to start boosting that kind of confidence style messaging somewhere in the spring. Once we hit summer, it's not confidence anymore. It's a different message, right? That will work for that particular audience.
So confidence in spring. So let's pause there for a second. Confidence in spring. What is it in summer?
Well, for this particular brand, it was 2 types of confidence, which I found really fascinating. So when you do these NLPs, it'll give you the actual like frequency numbers, right? But it's my job to basically do more deep-seated research using all kinds of different things, Google Trends and Pinterest Trends and all kinds of things, to understand, again, what type of confidence. And every time I say this to a brand, they look at me like I have 2 heads.
No.
They're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Makes total sense.
And I'm like, okay, this is messaging. This is what we're talking about today, is like, messaging is not supposed to be basic,
right?
Because emotions are not basic. We just talked about earlier. They're blended, right?
Yeah.
So confidence can go in 2 different directions. You can either go boss babe confidence, which is more like self-esteem and like working on how you feel as a person, your confidence and identity. Or it can go cheeky, which is much more appeal focused.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily identity focused.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I totally see what you. Yeah, that's a really helpful
Different
distinction.
types.
I think you think about like just like instincts of different women I've been around or something like that, right? Because we're talking about beauty industry, we're talking about women. Like, yeah, the sort of the boss babe woman versus like the cheeky, almost
Yeah.
like charm is almost the word I would think of, like
Yes.
as
Charming.
different
Yep.
ways of exerting their confidence, right? One of them is almost more
Yes.
like
100%.
seeking to. I'm generalizing here, so tell me if you think. I mean, you've thought about this a lot harder than I am, so just tell me where I'm wrong. But the I think of one as seeking to exert a more sort of active kind of. I want to say
Yeah.
control, but I think that's actually probably not quite the right word, but we'll just use it. Okay, maybe the boss babe is more like active kind of control and sort of manipulating their world, right? Really directly, more directly. Whereas I think of the other
Yeah.
person is also trying to do something similar, but actually with a more indirect, subconscious kind
Yeah.
of.
Yep.
They're not trying to exert the control; they're trying to attract a certain kind of person,
Yes.
which is, and maybe
Exactly.
maybe the
Yep.
boss babe person is actually less concerned about attracting and more concerned about just like exhibiting. And so, like,
Yeah.
speaking
Yeah.
to, but both, I totally see what you mean. Both are reflecting a certain kind of confidence, right?
Both
Like,
work. Yeah.
yeah,
Both can actually work. Well, and like
yeah,
the boss babe, it goes more into capability. I want to feel capable, right?
right.
Everything I do, no matter what I'm doing with my job or my kids or my husband or my boyfriend, whoever it is, I'm capable everywhere I go,
Yeah,
right? So
that's
that
good.
comes down
Capability is right.
to
That's better than control. Yeah,
understanding ability. It's still confidence, but cheeky is much more about this. Like, I want to be flirtatious. I want people to be attracted, drawn
right,
to me.
right.
Different type of confidence. And the weird part is
That's really
this
helpful.
happens in every single industry, in every single brand, for every single customer
Totally.
on the planet. Like, you can't go with base emotions: fear, surprise, disgust, anger, sadness, happiness. That's about as far as people go in marketing. It's so much deeper than that, incredibly complex. And the deeper you go, the better it hits.
Yeah. That's a really helpful principle, that essentially the more you can really tap into those desires, and probably the more that your product actually accomplishes or can
Yeah,
conceivably accomplish the thing you're trying to do
yep,
there, the
exactly.
more it can conceivably deliver on that promise to the
Yeah,
customer, right? Like, the easier it is going to be
100%.
to reach that spot, which is why you start with one
Yeah,
and then you expand out
yep,
from there, where it might get more expensive to reach
expand.
somebody who's maybe
Yep,
a little further away from your sort of core value or something like that.
exactly.
I think it's really helpful. Can we talk a little bit about how you would speak differently to those two women? So
Yes,
again, sort
yeah,
of take
yeah.
it to the next level, to the sort of super practical level. Um, if I'm thinking about, let's say I'm in the beauty industry, maybe skincare or something like that, right? Like, do I build my brand for one of those women and leave the other one on the table? Is that the way to do this? And like really recognize that
Mm,
I'm trying to speak to a subset of people
yeah,
all the way down to the brand level, because there's plenty of power, like,
yeah,
boss women, and there's plenty of cheeky women out there, and so I don't need to
yeah,
try to really win both. Or do I think about this at the ad level, or I'm trying to create separate funnels? Like, how would you think
yeah,
about sort of actually taking that into what the brand is going to try to accomplish next?
yeah. This goes down into Taylor Holiday. So shout out to Taylor.
Yeah,
I 100% agree with him. This is a brand issue now.
yeah,
We're not specifically talking about, again, I like to test messaging at the ad level, and then I like to take it into the bigger ecosystem.
yeah,
I want to test what's working psychologically on the ad, and then move it to a lander, and then move it into the email and into, the entire
yeah,
ecosystem as a whole. So, best example of this that I've ever seen. I'm obsessed with Liquid Death. I cannot get enough of their
yeah.
marketing. They are
The
brilliant
best
over
at it.
there,
They're the best.
mostly
Yeah,
because they know what they sell.
yeah.
Liquid Death does not sell water in a can. In
No,
fact, they weren't even the first to come on the market to sell it. Aquafina was doing it for years before they were. However, Aquafina was going after one specific type of emotion, which was basically duty,
yeah,
is what they were trying to go after. They were going after the eco-friendly angle.
yeah,
So they were trying to get people to feel responsible for the planet, which is actually a very difficult angle to go after emotionally.
yeah,
Liquid Death came on the scene and figured out pretty quickly that there was a group of people that were basically using cans, dumping out the Red Bull and filling them with water so that they could take them to their shows and drink water on stage without having to seem like they were drinking from a plastic water bottle,
yeah.
right? So it was really interesting origins. I don't know if you've ever
I
heard of
didn't
like the
know that.
origins
Yeah,
of Liquid Death. Yeah, that's the reason why he did it, is because he's literally just like into metal bands.
yeah,
And Mike Cesario went to a concert and saw people were dumping out dumping out Red Bull and filling it
poison.
with water.
Yeah,
So again, use case, fantastic. Emotion though goes much deeper than that. So he could have gone and just sold the idea of, hey, maybe just make a can, right? That
Yeah.
has water in it. That's like Aquafina, and we're
Yeah.
still kind of eco-friendly. But he went a totally different direction and started selling Rebellion.
Right.
And that was the emotion that got people hooked on what he was providing, because he doesn't sell water in a can. He sells misfit level Rebellion.
Yeah, and it's
And it's
also
everywhere.
funny. I mean, like it's like
Yeah.
trying to speak
It's
to
humorous.
people in a way that takes. I mean, I think I've always thought of Liquid Death as a fascinating example because it speaks to the it's the ultimate indication that the idea that like product always wins is just totally wrong. Like
Yep.
it is the same. It is literally
Yeah.
the most ridiculous product to like
Yeah.
to possibly sell, and or it's the product where the marketing does all of the value add more
Yes.
obviously than anything else you can
Yeah.
imagine, right? It's literally
Yes.
water, and
100%.
you know, and then like
Yeah.
it's an
Like the most basic
unsellable.
product ever.
There's no feature and benefit here, right? Like if you try and sell hydration with
Yep.
water, like
Yep.
it's just silly. So it just
100%.
can't be it.
Yeah.
And but I think that even the behavior you're talking about is another example of this. It's sort of fascinating. Like the idea that somebody would go to a metal show and would be sort of so embarrassed to drink out of a plastic water bottle.
Yes. Oh,
And
so key. Embarrassment.
Right.
Oh.
That they actually
Yes.
are dumping out, but they also don't want to
so
drink
glad you
Red
caught
Bull
that.
because they're like a little health
Yeah.
conscious or whatever. They don't want to get jittery or whatever it
Yes.
is. And it's like, you know, again,
100%.
sorry, Nate Legos, that Red Bull is
Yeah.
poison. They like, they're like,
Poor Nate.
yeah, they dump out a can of Red Bull and put water in it.
Yes.
Like
They
that is a
dumped it out.
fascinating human behavior that speaks to something much deeper than drinking water, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you notice, like, and again, I get into deep arguments with people, mostly because I truly believe again, 100% of almost 100% of what we do is based off emotion. We're just doing things out
Yeah.
here. We're just reacting to whatever feels good in the moment, basically. The toughest part about that as marketers and tactically focused like operators in an industry where we're trying to sell products to build companies, we have to have tactical ways and logical ways to solve for emotional behavior. And that's what I'm trying to fix is like Liquid Death sells emotion. That's the only reason why they've grown to be as big as they are, is because they sell rebellion in a humorous way. And to your point, like a little bit ago, how do you sell to multiple different people with multiple different emotions? You find one core emotion that fits several large markets is the best way to do this.
Yeah, okay.
Because rebellion goes everywhere. Everyone at some point has felt like they don't fit in, and that's why they buy from Liquid Death.
Yeah. And I also think there's a thing where people just want to, it's not, maybe rebellion is like almost a negative framing of it, but like another framing of that same thing would be just being like cool or different, like the desire to sort of stand out in a way that's interesting, where it's like
okay with being unique.
And there's something about there's something about that product that's a good example of this too, where it's just like Aquafina, like you mentioned the climate kind of angle or whatever, you know, and I agree with you. I think like so this is a broader, there's actually been a lot of times in this conversation I've wanted to actually step out of the marketing conversation and talk to you about philosophy, but this is a broader thing.
That'd be such a good episode.
Yeah, maybe we just like tag it on the back. But like, just sorry if you don't care what our musings about human behavior are in a philosophical sense. If you just want the marketing stuff, then fine. But I believe there is no human action that isn't self-interested. That's like one of the things that I think is fundamental to human experience. I don't think that's good or bad. I think it's like saying gravity is good or bad. It's like, who cares? Like it just is. It's gravity.
It just is.
That's what I think. And so I think it's very hard to sell people on the idea that, even the idea of selling, like Tom's is the extreme example of this, right? So you go back to Tom's and their heyday when they're selling all this stuff, people were not buying shoes for other people. That is not what they were buying. What they were buying was being the kind of person who bought shoes for other people. In that respect, it's self-interested, right?
Signaling.
Yeah, exactly. Signaling is the right word for it, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're a Tom's purchaser, you're buying something for yourself. And now, not to say people are like, anyway, I don't mean it to sound, again, it's not even negative really in one sense. Like it's like gravity. I'm just saying that's what is going on, as opposed to even casting a lot of judgment about that. I just don't think, and in fact, I think the most amazing things people do in the world is when they can find the interaction, the overlap of their self-interest and like the good that gets created from their actions. In fact, most times those are exactly the kinds of things that bring them the most joy, which is self-interested as well. So so it's okay. It's okay to buy shoes that signal something if you think it's doing some good in the world because you get some joy out of that. That's fine. But I think there's something to that notion that you can't do that. So to come back to the example, Aquafina, I think of it as selling freshness as much as anything else. Like the whole brand is like around this idea that you'll feel cleansed. You'll feel like it's like almost like Fiji's maybe a more extreme example of this, right? Exactly. You'll feel like you're taking care of yourself. You're doing something good for you. It's like, it's good quality water that will make you, you know what I'm saying? And whereas liquid death, you're like, who cares? It's water. This is funny. And I'm going to stand out and drink the like death water, you know?
Well, this is such a good example of two different brands using two different emotions. I don't know that Aquafina knew which emotion they were going after. They just thought people like water because it's refreshing.
Yeah.
If you go for superficial emotions, it's going to be so hard to get where you want to go, because again, the deeper the emotion, the better your ads are going to hit, the better your messaging is going to hit with your consumer, your customer. It's really important to realize though, that if you choose an emotion that all of your competitors are also going after, there's no reason for you to even be in business.
Right.
Because it's going to be an uphill battle. The only thing that will differentiate you at that point is a price war.
Yeah.
And I do not suggest you get into that, because pricing psychology is a whole nother topic.
Yeah.
We could talk for like hours on that one. So again, which emotion are you selling? You need to know. And then again, your whole brand needs to just completely attach itself to that one emotion and never get off it. Like, just stay as close to that emotion as you possibly can. And if you can, then you end up with results like Liquid Death and Nike and Apple, and like, because these people never deviate from what their core emotion is.
Where should someone start thinking about this for their brand? Like, let's say you're listening to this conversation and you're going, okay, I'm sold. I believe what Sarah is saying here, and I have not thought enough about emotion. I've been thinking entirely about features and benefits and all that stuff. How should someone begin to do the thing we talked about earlier, right? To do the analysis step. How should somebody begin to get at this a little bit in their brand?
This is a little bit tougher, mostly because, I've been in marketing for 15, 16 years, and I've been studying consumer psychology and behavior for 10. So like, mostly just because it was interesting. Like, Sarah's just a weird person, and I just love the information. If you're the type of person though that you're just like, I don't even know where to go for information on how to get started on this, one, you either hire someone like me who can just do it for you, or the best place to go is just to start studying the people who are dissecting human psychology specifically for marketers. So go read that Marketing to Mind States book. That's probably my top of my list, because it will teach you kind of the emotions that currently are in the markets, and what to do with them, how to market to them.
Okay,
secondary to that, I would say,
that is in the show notes. I'm writing it down right now. So if you want to get that, you can go follow up there.
Love that one.
Yeah. Okay. Second thing you're saying?
My next resource right now that I'm just addicted is a website called Araya. I think that's how you say it, Araya. ARIYH.com. This is from a gentleman named Thomas McKinley. He's fantastic. He's actually like a consumer behavior researcher. So he distills down all of like the research-based marketing studies that are currently being like actually cultivated in the space.
So you can tap into academia a little bit without having to go read journals.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Because like, unless you're Sarah and you like to read studies that are boring and dry.
But let's assume you're not.
It just takes a lot of time. Exactly. It takes a lot of time. So the nice part is too, if you go into his like pro version, Araya Insights, it'll break it down for, here's all of the studies about e-commerce. Here's the ones about messaging and copy. Here's about like reviews and how to price things correctly and how to do promotions correctly based on the science of what's currently being studied. So that's a secondary research that I'm like in every day, all day long.
Yeah, I've always wondered.
And then after that,
he's got a newsletter too, huh? I've always wondered, like, who is out there doing this? Because there's this research being done, and there's all of us just trying to operate our businesses, and there's this bridge that somebody needs to make. So it sounds like this is that bridge. That's cool. Okay, I'm interested in that.
Yeah, fantastic stuff over there. But really, I mean, you could just start with chat. That sounds weird, but like having something that has the ability to deeply dissect language is immensely helpful. So you can do your own research by taking down your reviews or your customer surveys or like your post-purchase surveys and throwing them into chat and say, chat, analyze this for me and tell me which emotions people are currently experiencing while they purchase. Who's
That's a good
influencing
idea.
those purchases? Are they talking about their parents or their sister or their best friend? Who's influencing the purchase? And then third to that, what were they feeling after the purchase? And chat, as long as you have a decent amount of data, chat will go through and actually do that analysis for you.
That's a very good idea. That is a nice answer to the question where to start. And I like those resources as well. So you can get the sort of ongoing resources mixed with like a really practical thing here, which is like run your reviews through ChatGPT, go and yeah, that's really good. All right, Sarah, there's a lot more we could say, but we will save it for a future episode for now. Thank you for this. It's been really helpful. Let's say I want to go hire Sarah Levinger to work on my brands and to understand consumer psychology, rebuild my brand, rebuild my messaging to speak to these things more deeply. Where do I go to do that?
Yeah, you can go over to sarahlevinger.co.
With an H. Sarah with an H.
LEVINGER.co. I'm also at Sarah Levinger basically everywhere except for Instagram because I couldn't get that handle. I was so mad.
Stupid other Sarah Levinger.
Instagram, I know.
Scooped
I'm like, who else? What other Sarah Levinger is there?
Yeah, somebody out
and
there.
Nobody's on that account. Like it's an empty account. I'm so confused. Anyway. Sarah.Levinger over on Instagram. Everywhere else.
Yeah, it's actually somebody who just like was trying to.
I'm sure it is.
Trying to go on there and then sell it to you for exorbitant amount. Yeah.
People, I mean, smart. I appreciate the hustle.
Yeah, right.
That's amazing.
Okay, sarahlevinger.co, a recently revamped website, I'm told, which is great. So you can actually do that and you can reach out. Or you can just DM her on Twitter, which is what I did to get this conversation going. And you should definitely go and do that. Sarah, thank you so much. This is really helpful.
Yes. Thanks for having me.
All right. All the links for everything that I talked about with Sarah in this episode are available to you in the show notes. Go check those out to follow up with Sarah, follow up with me, past episodes of mine that I referenced. All those things are there for you. If you would like to reach out to me for anything else, it's all available through ajfgrowth.com, including, of course, subscribing to this podcast. You can do that right now, wherever you are listening to it, or there. There's all the links for where you prefer to listen to your podcasts are all there. Go to ajfgrowth.com for that. Drop your email address in the email capture there, and you'll get my newsletter as it starts coming out more regularly here in the very near future. And great episodes coming up soon that you are not going to want to miss. I've got an episode on growing an apparel brand, a fashion brand with Alex Greenfield. That's going to be really good. That's actually going to be, that's a really cool episode that's coming. If you missed my episode with Taylor Holiday, go back and listen to that. That was a really fun conversation, a longer one. And like I said, subscribe wherever you're watching, wherever you're listening. Don't forget to follow up with my sponsors. They are great. That's BILY and more staffing. Links for those are in the show notes as well. Thanks so much. I'll see you next time.